welcome to another CBD Training Academy educational webinar series. My name is Rich Willens and I'm going to be your host tonight. Thank you very much for your interest not only in CBD, but your interest in CBD and how it could help not only whoever it is that you would like to help, but it'll help yourself. I am the author of a book, You, Me, and CBD, Living Life Pain-Free, and I can attest that CBD works. And I was very curious as to find out how CBD worked. And I was lucky enough to get involved with CBD Training Academy. And as you will see tonight, you are going to be floored. You're going to get the information you need, not only to clear up any misconceptions that you might have about CBD, but you're going to learn from our guest tonight, who is not only a doctor and expert in the field, but is going to explain how CBD works, how it can be dosed, and a lot of other things that we're just going to jump into. Here's a couple of rules that we're going to have for this training, because we want to make sure that you get all the information that you need. We want you to turn your phone off. We know how important not only this is, but we know your phone calls are important too. But this is for your future, and this information is so good, we want to get rid of all the distractions. If you've got a pen and paper, that would be awesome. It's always good to handwrite notes. If not, you will see that you can take screenshots of the doctor's slides as well as our slides. So you'll always have that information for reference. Plus, if you've got a question, I am going to be in the background and I'm going to be working the question box, so submit it at any time. Or if you want to wait when everything is over, the good doctor and I, we will take some questions as we are talking about everything we discussed tonight. Now, at the end of this informational training, we're going to have a couple of free gifts for you just for attending, and we'd like for you to take a post-webinar survey which would tell us how we do. So, and we're also going to tell you about how you can get a CBD certification and how this knowledge will make you an expert in the field. So I want to just take a minute before we bring the doctor on, and I want to talk about what is CBD training and who is CBD training for. Well, CBD training and CBD coaching is for anybody, a professional, who wants to get all the knowledge of CBD to help either their clients, to help get a job, to either further education, become a caregiver. There's a lot of reasons. If you're a professional in this market, it's so important to have something attached to your name. And if you can get a certification from the CBD Academy from an organization like us, that means a lot, and that also helps justify your brand. Plus, if you're professional or your coach, this would include if you have your own brand, if you white label, if you're in the retail business, if you're a nurse, a personal trainer. This is going to be excellent training for you. Specifically, not only will it help your clients feel better, but they'll be able to manage a better way of life. Now, tonight we're going to get right into this. This is part of our educational webinar series, and tonight's guest is Dr. Adam Aboudili. He is our Chief Medical Officer for CBD Training Academy. He is the Chairman of the Dispensary Review Committee for the Association of Cannabis Specialists. He both can do a colonoscopy and general surgery, because we know every 10 years you have to do that. And the cool thing about it, he's so involved with cannabis that he is the CEO and founder of a supplement company that he owns. He's the CEO. Is called Reserve MD. So please welcome to our guest tonight, Dr. Adam Aboudili. Hello, doctor. How are you tonight?
Great, Rich. Thank you.
Oh, very good. Where are you located tonight? Where are you broadcasting from?
I'm from Lake Placid, New York, up in northern New York.
Is it snowing up there?
As we speak, it is, as a matter of fact.
I love it. You know, I imagine it's cold too. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you the presenter. So I went ahead and I am giving you the reins, so to speak. There's our picture. If you can just go ahead and take over the screen. Now, folks, we're getting ready to start this. You're going to get about 45 minutes worth of solid content. We're going to be chatting about it. We will explain things if you don't understand them, but the most important thing is to pay attention, because everything that we chat about tonight is going to help you, and it's going to make you a better coach, and having the information. You know, they say education is important, but it's that use of education that's the most important. So, doctor, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Well, great. Well, thanks again, Rich. I appreciate the opportunity to give this presentation, and I'm looking forward to sharing with the audience a little bit about my story, about how I became involved in CBD, and also give everyone a brief overview of some of the benefits of CBD, as well as some of the other compounds found within the plant. I hope to provide some guidance for those who are considering CBD therapy, or for those who are considering working with individuals who are interested in using CBD therapy, because it is becoming increasingly popular and people have a lot of questions about it, and there's a really whole lot of knowledge that is needed in order to provide adequate advice for patients and consumers. So I'll just get started here. So one of the most common questions I get asked is how did a board-certified surgeon like myself become involved in incorporating CBD and cannabis into my practice? And my experience utilizing cannabis-based therapies for patients began back in 2010. And as a surgeon who specializes in gastrointestinal diseases as well as cancers involving the GI system, several of my patients would openly admit to me that they were utilizing cannabis to treat a variety of their symptoms associated with their diseases that they had. And I found that in multiple cases, they were actually receiving significant benefit, which oftentimes exceeded the outcomes compared to what I was providing them from a conventional medication standpoint. So this became somewhat of a dilemma for me, since I realized that their stories were real, and more importantly, their clinical outcomes were real. So it's something I just simply couldn't ignore. So patients were coming to me and saying, well, how is this stuff working? How is it helping? And I said, well, I need to spend time figuring that out. So since 2010, I spent a great deal of time understanding the science of the endocannabinoid system, as well as the science of CBD and other cannabis-based therapies. And as I've gained more and more knowledge in this field, I've really become a true believer in the therapy. For not only for our overall health, but also as a treatment option for several different medical conditions. I've subsequently taken this knowledge and continued to try to educate people about the benefits of CBD and cannabis-based therapies. And early on in the utilization of CBD, I used to consider CBD as simply as an additive therapy to conventional pharmaceutical treatment options. But over the years, I've begun utilizing it as a primary therapy. And when I started getting involved in this field, my experience was limited primarily to utilizing CBD for patients with cancers and other conditions affecting the GI system. But since then, I've treated thousands of patients with CBD for a vast variety of medical conditions. So in order to understand how CBD may help individuals, you first have to have a general understanding of the endocannabinoid system. So what is the endocannabinoid system? Well, the word endocannabinoid system is derived from two separate words. The first term, endogenous. This term means that it's from within us, because the endocannabinoid system is a system that's contained within our body. The second word comes from cannabis, hence endocannabinoid. Giving us the word endocannabinoids, since the components within the endocannabinoid system interact the same way as the compounds do that are derived from the cannabis plant. So the role of the endocannabinoid system is to provide homeostasis throughout our body. The word homeostasis it's a term you might frequently hear me refer to throughout these presentations, so I think it's important for me to help define this term first. Homeostasis is a state of equilibrium. It's a way our body ensures that our internal systems and our organs are regulated properly to maintain a healthy state, even during times of stress, such as illness or trauma. An example that I frequently use to describe this homeostasis is inflammation. Everybody talks about inflammation, whether it's good, whether it's bad. Well, inflammation does serve a purpose. It's a necessary process to heal an injury. But the problem can become if there's either too much inflammation or not enough inflammation. If there's too much inflammation, this can lead to further tissue damage. If there's not enough inflammation, this can inhibit our healing process. So one of the biggest roles of the endocannabinoid system is to ensure that these levels of inflammation in our body are appropriate. So as I mentioned, the endocannabinoid system is found in our body, and it's involved in multiple different processes throughout our body. This list here is just a few of the things that it's involved in. Of course, modulation of pain is a very hot topic when it comes to CBD therapy. We're hearing a lot about its use for seizure disorders. It's playing a larger and larger role in our understanding of appetite, digestion, and metabolism. It serves an important role in our immune system, which our immune system also is involved in tumor surveillance to help prevent us from getting certain types of cancers. It's involved in fertility, bone physiology. The list really goes on and on. So I want to talk briefly about just the timeline. Like, how did we get to where we are today? Well, first and foremost, cannabis is not new. It has been reported. The first reports of cannabis use as a medical condition dates back to 2800 BC, where people were reporting its use for multiple different conditions, mostly related to pain and inflammation. On the left side of this table, in 200, it was first described in the Chinese pharmacopoeia. So clearly, people recognized it as medicinal, as having medicinal properties. Now, of course, in the early 1900s, cannabis became illegal, and so our ability to study the plant and the plant-based compounds really got shut off. And it's unfortunate because it was during this time period in the mid-1900s where we also gained advances in science and technology that allowed us to understand more about the plant and how it interacts with our system. A lot of our research came in the late 80s and early 90s. Most of the research was done out of Israel, where we started to identify some receptors in our body that the plant-based cannabinoids are binding to. And since then, the education has really taken off. The science and our understanding has taken off, as have the legality of the plant is getting squared away and people have more access to it. We've been able to study it more frequently and more easily. So as I mentioned, the endocannabinoid system's role is to provide homeostasis. Now, how does it do that? Well, it does that through multiple different mechanisms. One of the mechanisms is that it helps protect our nerves. As I mentioned, inflammation needs to be controlled. And if there's too much inflammation, that can be a bad thing. If there's not enough inflammation, that can be a bad thing as well. So one of its roles is to protect our nerves through what we call neuroprotection. As I mentioned, it modulates our immune system to make sure that's kept in check, but also helps us identify potential threats to our body. It acts as it provides a protective layer against abnormal cells that become injured. It protects us against cancer cells, and then it also regulates our metabolism through nutrient transport, lipid metabolism, as well as energy storage. And this list is far from comprehensive, but it certainly hopefully provides some general outline of some of the ways it provides homeostasis within our body. The endocannabinoid system is made of three main components. The diagram you see on the right side of your screen are two nerve cells which are talking to each other. And the way that nerve cells talk to each other, and the way any cells talk to each other, is through chemical messengers, what we call neurotransmitters. Now, our body has natural endocannabinoids. These are not neurotransmitters, but they're actually neuromodulators. Now, what that means is that they actually help control the amount of neurotransmitters that are released. So it determines how active cells are talking to one another. Now, these neurotransmitters, as well as the neuromodulators of the endocannabinoid system, also have to have receptors which they bind to. And when these neurotransmitters or the neuromodulators bind to these receptors, they induce a particular response to the cell which they bind to. And then, just like every other system in our body where there are neurotransmitters and neuromodulators, there have to be enzymes which are responsible for making those neuromodulators, but also enzymes which are responsible for breaking them down. So let's talk about our natural body's endocannabinoids. These are natural compounds that our body makes that act as neuromodulators to, again, control the amount of signaling that occurs between two cells. And the two most common endocannabinoids are referred to as anandamide and 2-AG. Now, these two compounds are produced during times of stress. So if our body has an injury or an illness, we will naturally produce more of these. And what they do is that they help then downregulate the neurotransmitter release between the two cells. So for example, if somebody has chronic pain, one of the problems with chronic pain is that there's too much neurotransmitters being released from one cell to the next. Hence, patients experience increased pain. Anandamide and 2-AG can sense this, and what they will do is then they will tell those cells to actually slow down, not produce as much neurotransmitter, and therefore decrease the amount of pain which is sent pain signal which is sent from one cell to the next. And anandamide and 2-AG bind to multiple receptors, which I will go into. The most common being CB1 and CB2 receptors, which stands for cannabinoid type 1 and cannabinoid type 2 receptors, and then our TRPV receptors. And 2-AG predominantly binds to CB1 and CB2. So if you look at the endocannabinoid receptors throughout our body, although we talk primarily about cannabinoid type 1 and cannabinoid type 2 receptors, we also now know that the endocannabinoid system is made up of other receptors as well, which affect the role of the endocannabinoid system. For example, serotonin receptors called vanilloid receptors, as well as other receptors called peroxisome proliferator activated receptors, or also known as PPARs. And the diagram on the right shows the human body and kind of where these receptors are located. And these receptors, although they oftentimes tend to be located more frequently in certain parts of the body, these receptors are all throughout our body. And as you can see, they are involved in memory, seizure threshold, regulating our immune system, all of the things that we talked about before that the endocannabinoid system is involved in. So I wanted to talk briefly about two of the main cannabinoid receptors, because this is where you kind of have to start understanding how these receptors affect our body and our endocannabinoid system and the ailments. So the cannabinoid type 1 receptor, this is highly expressed in the brain. And if you look at this image in your upper right-hand corner, this is a brain image showing where the activity of the CB1 receptors are located. They're most prevalent in our brain and in our spinal cord, which is referred to as our central nervous system, but despite that, that's also found in our peripheral tissue as well, such as in our adipose tissue, which is our fat tissue, our liver, pancreas, muscle cells, our immune system. And its main job is to modulate neurotransmitter release. Now, activation of the CB1 receptor is also what is responsible for the main psychoactive component of different cannabis-based products. It is activation of the CB1 receptor, for example, by THC, is what's responsible for giving that individuals that euphoric or that high feeling that people get. Another important thing to note is about the safety of this, and I will touch upon this in a few slides later, but one thing I wanted you to keep in mind is that there are no CB1 receptors found in the brainstem. And that's important because that is the main reason why people can't overdose on cannabis. And I'll go into that in a little more detail in one of the presentations along the way here. The second receptor that I want to talk about is the CB2 receptor. So again, this is an MRI diagram showing where CB2 receptors are primarily lit up. And as you can see, a lot less in the brain and in the spinal cord, but a lot more in our intra-abdominal organs, which also contain all of are involved in our immune system and our metabolism, as well as detoxification of our system. These cells are, the CB2 receptor's main role is to act as, to modulate inflammation. So as a result, the CB2 receptors are found on the cells which are responsible for immunomodulation and inflammation, such as our B cells, our T cells, and our macrophages. And when these cells are and when these receptors are activated, they act in inhibitory fashion to the immune system. So if you have too much inflammation and you activate a CB2 receptor, it'll help downregulate that inflammatory response. So increased CB2 receptor signaling results in decreased inflammation. Again, it's one of the many things that it does, but it certainly is a good starting point to understanding what the CB2 receptor actually does. And the third part of the endocannabinoid system are the regulatory enzymes. The diagram below, again, shows two cells talking to each other. And there's a lot going on this slide, but basically what I'm trying to express in this slide is that our natural endocannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG, they also have to be broken down. Just like any other hormone or neurotransmitter in our body, there's always an enzyme that's responsible for breaking them down. And in this case, anandamide is broken down by something called fatty acid aminohydrolase, which we'll just refer to as FAAH, where 2-AG is broken down by monoacylglycerol lipase, and we'll refer to this as MAGL. And this is important. The reason I bring this up is because it's important because a lot of the effects of CBD one of the effects of CBD can be to act particularly on these regulatory enzymes. So how do plant-based cannabinoids interact with our endocannabinoid system? Well, currently there's over 100 different types of cannabinoids. Everybody likes to talk about THC and CBD. Those are the two major cannabinoids because they make up the majority of the cannabinoids within the cannabis plant. However, we know that there's over 100 different ones, which we refer to as minor phytocannabinoids or minor cannabinoids. And they also, we're learning, have very important roles as well. CBC, CBG, CBN, THCV. We're learning more and more every day about the roles that these play within our endocannabinoid system and their potential use for therapies. We refer to the cannabinoids as the primary compounds within the plant, but then we have secondary compounds as well. One is called terpenes, which I'll dive into a little more in the next slide. The other are flavonoids. Flavonoids are found within the plant as well, and they have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties as well. And the way that all these compounds work is they can work individually to have a particular effect, but they really work through multiple different mechanisms by working together as what's referred to as the entourage effect. So these particular compounds, one of the ways that they can act is they can bind directly to our endocannabinoid receptors, like we talked about. They can bind to CB1 receptors, CB2 receptors to cause a particular response within that cell. They may alter the structure and function of that receptor so that receptor acts differently. It may also bind to other receptors, including serotonin receptors, which you may be familiar, is one of the targets for antidepressant medications as well as anti-anxiety medications. And they also block those two enzymes, which I talked about, which are responsible for breaking down our natural endocannabinoids, FAH and MAGL. So therefore, they can actually, by blunting the breakdown of our natural endocannabinoids, CBD, for example, will help raise our own natural levels of endocannabinoids. So we still have a lot to learn, but research is going to continue to focus on how the numerous compounds found within the plant will interact with our endocannabinoid system. So I want to next talk about terpenes. Okay, terpenes. What are terpenes? Well, terpenes are what give cannabis its aroma. Now, it's also what gives lemons its aroma. It gives lavender its aroma. It gives hops its aroma. Now, the reason these terpenes exist is not just for us to take advantage of some of the medicinal benefits of them, but they act as a survival mechanism for plants themselves. So, for example, some of the particular aromas that plants make, which are provided by the terpenes, may help encourage pollination from particular insects, but some of these compounds will also inhibit predators from eating the plants. So, an animal will come up to a plant, the plant needs to survive. It doesn't want a deer to eat it, so it may produce a particular terpene, which will then cause that predator to stay away from that plant. So they serve multiple different roles biologically for the plant, but we've learned over decades of botanical health products that these have real effects. And the great example, I think the easiest example that I like to always provide is with lavender. For those of you that are familiar with lavender and what we use lavender for, is that it can be very calming, relaxing, sedating. People use it as extracted oils in a diffuser to help to lessen anxiety, to help with sleep. And why is that? Well, the reason that is because of a terpene called linalool. And linalool is what is responsible for having that somewhat sedative and calming effect. Where on the other hand, if you look at limonene, which is the terpene found in lemons, that tends to be helpful for actually elevating our mood, maybe giving us a little more energy. If you look at something like caryophyllene, which is found in cloves or black pepper, it has a very strong anti-inflammatory effect. And the cannabis plant actually contains varying degrees of all of these different terpenes, in addition to several other different terpenes. But what you see on your screen here are the main terpenes found in the majority of cannabis plants. So I want to end this section just with a general comment stating that, you know, at being a traditionally trained physician who really received no education in botanical supplementation for health, I really had to kind of dive into this myself in order to figure out if this was real or not. And one of the ways I did that is I wanted to go to the heart of the research center of the world, where most of our understanding of the endocannabinoid system has been developed. And most of our research to date has come out of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And the current godfather of CBD and cannabis-based therapy, if you will, is a physician, scientist by the name of Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. You'll see him here down on the bottom. I believe this picture was taken in the 70s, but here you can see he's educating about CBD. And I went to Jerusalem last year to visit him in his lab. And he has a 6-story building which is dedicated to nothing but understanding the science of the plant and how it's being used for a variety of ailments. So it was a really wonderful experience, and it really added a great deal of validity and credibility to my understanding, and has been a great resource for me to continue to stay on top of all the advanced science which is occurring.
And you are correct with that. You know, I got to tell you, doctor, and excuse me for interrupting. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. You know, when you're doing research on Dr. Mechoulam, you know, considering some people consider him the father of cannabis, so to speak, because he's actually, even though it's been around, and I love it that you brought up what was it, 2800 BC, you know, the beginning of cannabis, and when you fast forward it to Dr. Mechoulam, you know, it's amazing that it took so very long to break it down and actually take it to the level where we are today. You know, I found a couple of points that you made in your presentation, you know, very awesome. Really going back to 2800 BC, how do you know that? I mean...
Well, there's been multiple documentations of that, but they've also found evidence of cannabis itself being found in Egyptian tombs, and with actual documentation of it being used for particular ailments, everything from treating chronic pain to treating hemorrhoids to treating bleeding conditions to treating headaches. And so, you know, this has just been documented over history. No matter where you look, cannabis has played a role in health of ancient civilizations for as far back as we can see. You
gotta love that. You know, CBD for hemorrhoids in the year 2800 BC. Who'd have thunk it, huh? So,
That's
you know, I know, and when you talk about, and I was watching all of your screens, and I was just trying to formulate it because I have a brick and mortar store, and I talk to people all the time, and they rely on me, and people, even today, he said, I trust you. What can I do? And there's so much misinformation out there, and just listening to your presentation alone, there's an opportunity, and I've been screenshotting, and if you take a look at the top, you're able to screenshot some of your slides. If some of those words you don't understand, you can always look them up on your own, because this is part of the research tool that we have, and you'll be able to break it down into your own words, where you can explain the CB1 receptor is from your brain, and the CB2 receptor handles the things that are in your organs. And one more thing that just amazed me, doctor, you mentioned that there are no CBD receptors in the brain stems, and that is why you can't OD on cannabis?
Correct. So our brainstem is what controls our signal to breathe. So when you hear about people dying from overdoses from either opioids, heroin, fentanyl, these types of things, the reason that happens is that we have opioid receptors in our brainstem, and when you have these molecules binding to the opioid receptors, it decreases our drive to actually breathe. So the reason people die from overdoses is because they stop breathing. Now, fortunately for us, there are no CB receptors found within the brainstem, so therefore it can't inhibit our ability to breathe, which is why to date we do not have a single documented report of an overdose, a death related to an overdose of cannabis.
And that's amazing. And technically, we haven't had a report of a death since 2800 BC, if you think about it. Okay, so do you think there's more to be discovered? Are we at the apex, or what is it? Is it the CBD and beyond, as Buzz would say?
Well, we are undoubtedly at the tip of the iceberg here. And the reason is our ability now to start to study this plant, and as the legislation starts to kind of figure itself out here, is going to really help accelerate our understanding of this. We've actually already learned that there's several other receptors in the body. Just in the past year or two, we've learned where our endocannabinoids bind to, as well as things like CBD bind to. For example, there's a receptor called GPR55, and although I talked briefly about there being a CB1 and a CB2 receptor, people are starting now to refer to this particular receptor as the CB3 receptor. And so it's only a matter of time before we're going to find more and more receptors, but we're also we're also learning that there's more endocannabinoids than simply anandamide and 2-AG that we're learning about, and we'll have to figure out the role that they play within our endocannabinoid system. And I think one of the things I think that we're going to learn about more and more, which I stress this over and over again to audiences, is that I believe that we're going to eventually be using these plant-based therapies in a targeted fashion. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we know that we're all genetically different, and it's what we call genetic polymorphisms, meaning that one individual may have different types of cannabinoid receptors where as opposed to another individual. And in my line of work dealing with colon cancers, for example, when I remove a colon cancer, we send it to our pathologist. They look at it under a microscope, but they also send it for particular testing to determine how different it is and to understand that tumor exactly. So then we can target chemotherapy directly at that type of tumor cell. So same way that not all cancers of the colon are created equal, our human endocannabinoid system is not created equally. So over the upcoming years, I anticipate that we're going to gain a great deal of knowledge on how we all genetically are different when it comes to our endocannabinoid system, and that's going to help us target our therapy.
Well, as part of CBD Training Academy, and you are our staff doctor, we stress the importance of CBD education. As part of the CBD Academy, there's 4 different courses that they offer, and I've displayed them up here. One is the CBD professional course. They have a certified course where not only you are professional, but you are actually given a certificate that certifies you as a CBD professional. We also have a certified CBD coach course, which teaches you how to talk to your clients, how to treat them, how to come across not as their doctor, but as somebody who can give them the information they need so they can get better. And some of our other courses, you know, we have our business builder course. If that's what you want to do, if you want to make this a business, whether it's online or brick and mortar, CBD's Business Training Academy, the course builder, could be a possibility for you. And then we have our online courses, which is the CBD Training Academy's on-demand courses. So if you are going to cbdtrainingacademy.com, if you use promo code CBDTAW20, that should give you a nice 20% discount of any one of the products that will enhance you and your business. So, Doctor, that's all I have to say. How about you?
Yeah, I think that sums it up.
That's great. So on behalf of Dr. Abudili and myself, Rich Willens, and on behalf of CD Training Academy, another part of the educational webinar series, thank you very much for watching.
Thank you, Rich.